1997, we're in Columbus, Ohio, with Mr. Judson Edwards of the 494th Company B Battalion, or B
Battery.
B Battery.
Yeah.
That's right. And my name's Slade McClendon. I'll be doing the interview. And we'll just start from the beginning. If you can tell me about your childhood, where you grew up, and a little bit about your parents and the circumstances there.
I was born in Galena, Ohio, where I presently live, just about a block from where I live right now. And my grandfather was a doctor, and I was named after him, and he delivered me, my own grandfather. I think at about 3 years old, the family moved to Sunbury, about 2 miles north. And I lived there, went to school there, graduated from high school there. And then I got a job in the Nestle Food Company that makes Taster's Choice coffee. Worked there a year and was thinking about the military. A friend of mine that worked there went to Columbus and took a test for the Naval Air Corps. And I thought, that's for me. So the next day I went down there and took the test. It took about 4 hours, and it was really a tough test. And I remember the officer said, do the best you can because you won't get another chance. Later on in the day, they give the results of the test, and I passed it. And I had to go back the next day for the physical, and I thought, I'm in. But the next day when they give the physical, one eye wasn't quite 20/20 and they wouldn't take me. Then I went back home just a little while the Army drafted me.
What did your mother and father do? What did your mother and father do?
My father worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. He was a telegrapher, and that was maybe kind of a foreboding because later on in the service, when I was assigned to the driver's section, which I detested, I didn't want anything to do with the truck or any of that. And while we were having lessons on how to change dual wheels and things like that, someone came from the orderly room and said the list of people I read off made a high score on the radio signal test. And if you'd be interested, why, we'll give you the test again, see if it's just a mistake. And if you do better, why then you can go to radio school. I was happy.
Where was that at?
That was in Camp Campbell, Kentucky. So I went to radio school for CW and passed that. And then that was my occupation in the service.
When did you, after you were drafted, where did you enlist and what were the events around that?
Well, I left on the train from Delaware, Ohio, and went directly to Indiana, Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana, where we were given all of our clothes and everything. And then from there we went to Camp Campbell, Kentucky.
And what did you think of Camp Campbell?
It was different. I remember at Fort Benjamin Harrison, I thought this one corporal or sergeant, whatever, he just treated us like a bunch of dogs. And I thought, I'm not liking this already. Well, when we got to Camp Campbell, the first sergeant says, here we are, you can go to town in the evening, you know, after reveille, after retreat. And I thought, this is different now. This fella's treating us like we're human. And I like that.
What were the barracks and the camp like?
It was two-story barracks at Camp Campbell. And every morning, why, one fellow at the end of the building would have a mop and a broom, and he would sweep and mop, and then pass it on to the next man. He would do the same, and on down the line. But there was one boy that had a problem with hay fever. He got to be outside while all this is going on. He didn't have to go through that.
When did you get your assignment at Campbell? Pretty soon after you got there?
Yeah, that's when they assigned me to the driver's section. And that's when they finally sent me to radio school.
What did you do at radio school?
Well, I learned the CW, Morse code, and how to use that.
Okay. And what was your experience in Tennessee maneuvers?
In Tennessee maneuvers?
Yes, sir.
I was a radio operator with the umpires.
What does that mean?
On maneuvers, they have umpires that kind of check the whole situation and presumably give grades on their reaction and how they progress with the plan. And I was a radio operator, and I would receive fire missions and transfer fire missions for the ones that were in the artillery.
After the Tennessee maneuvers, did you guys go down to Camp Barkley pretty soon after that?
Yeah, we left Camp Forest, Tennessee after maneuvers and went directly to Camp Barkley, Texas.
Remember anything about the train ride?
The train ride I don't remember very much about, but after we got to Camp Barkley and I first went to Abilene, I told somebody, I think I've died and gone to heaven. It's such a beautiful city. Because in Camp Campbell and in that area of Hopkinsville and Clarksville, the buildings were all smoky and cruddy, you know, and just on account of the smoke, and all of a sudden here we are in Texas, in Abilene. No smoke, you know, no dirty, mangy buildings.
Did you go into Abilene often?
Pretty often, yeah.
What did you do when you were in town?
Oh, I basically behaved myself, I'll put it that way, because I would have to say that I met some fellows in the service that were nice people, and then after they were in a while, it kind of changed them. and some of them that had been used to being straight up guys got to drinking and carrying on and carousing and all of that. And I didn't go for that. My dad drilled it into me. My son never going to smoke or drink or any of that. And he impressed me with living like you should live. And it worked.
That's interesting. Were the people in Abilene, what were they like?
People there were friendly, and they had a group of high school kids that came over to entertain, and they had this orchestra that played for us. And this one girl played a flute, and she impressed me with her talent, her looks, and I got into conversation with her, and we went to the day room, played some ping pong together, and then I told her I would like to correspond with her, and we wrote back and forth, and that girl would print every letter. Every letter she wrote me, she printed. I couldn't believe that. But she was a nice girl.
Did y'all keep in touch while you were overseas?
I what?
While you were overseas?
Oh, no, because the last letter she wrote me, she said my parents were not in favor of their daughter getting involved with a military person, but in my case, her parents would have had no worries at all.
All right. What was life like at Camp Barkley? What did you do there? What did you guys?
It was in that particular area in our barracks. We didn't have to have inspection because the sand, the wind would get up and the sand would work in around the windows, and so they just dispensed with anything like that. You could take your hand on your cot blanket and go like that, and the sand would pop up and down.
What were training exercises like?
Well, mainly the tanks. We had an M7 tank. There were 6 in a battery, and they would go out on exercises and set up for formations. And I was in reconnaissance section, and when they had to have a particular formation, why, they'd call me to relay the formation. I remember you'd say battery adjust, shell, HE for high explosive, then fire 1. And they would have one particular gun that was the most accurate to fire first, and then the forward observer would say, after they fired, they might say 100 over, meaning they were 100 yards beyond the target. And then they would fire again, and they might say 50 right. That was 50 yards to the right of the target. And then after that, they got right on the target, and then they would relay that to the other guns, and they would all zero in on the same target.
And you guys practice that at Camp Barkley? You guys practice that at Camp Barkley?
Camp Barkley, like I related earlier, was a beautiful city. So one day, while I was in radio operation, none of the other men had been able to get this station. So I said, well, I'll see what I can do with it. And I worked on it and worked on it. And after a while they said, well, it's chow time. And I says, I don't care. I'm sticking with this till I get that station. And after a while, you heard that sound come down to where it was right in on the station. And that evening, the first sergeant came around and he said, Edwards, you've got a 3-day pass. I said, what for? He said, you had the best radio operation in the whole battalion this week. So I thought, well, I've been to Abilene. Maybe I'll just stay in camp, just lounge around. About an hour later, he came back through the barracks. He says, Edwards, what are you doing here? You got a 3-day pass. Get out of here. So I got on a bus and went to Abilene, and then I thought, well, a lot of the fellows have talked about going to Fort Worth. So I got a travel bureau car. And they would take 8 of us in this car for $8 a piece, one way. It took us to Fort Worth. Might have a flat or two before we got there, because he was carrying the mail when he was going to Fort Worth. So I went to a servicemen's center, and you could stay there for 50 cents a night. Up on the second floor of the building, they had a room full of double-deck bunks. I mean, a big room full. So I got in there, and then I went out in the town, and I saw this little 10-year-old that had a jacket on, and he had patches from all different Army outfits, but he didn't have one of the 12th Armored. So he asked me if I could get him one. I said, yeah, next time I come to Fort Worth, I'll bring you one. So the next time I got in there, I got this patch for him. He took me out to his parents' place. And ever after that, when I went to Fort Worth, all I had to do was go to his house, and they'd put me up for the weekend. On Sunday morning, the Sunday paper would be laying there on my bed. I had a key to the back door. And that one morning at the Servicemen's Center, a couple of girls came in. They wanted to know if anybody wanted to go down to the Y for breakfast. And me and one other fella went with him. And I saw some nice looking girls there at the Y. The one girl, her name was Mickey, I remember. I went shopping with her, which was no big thrill, but I stuck with it. Got back to the Y, and then I saw this other girl that really took my eye. And I said, that's for me. And I met her and made a roller skating date with her. I think it was at the Will Rogers Memorial where they had the rink. And okay, would meet on West 7th Street at 7 o'clock. I went back to this little boy's house where I stayed. And that evening, they talked and talked, and I didn't know how to cut in. And I'm nervous, you know. I want to get out of there so I can get down to West 7th Street. And I was an hour late when I got down there, and I about died. I thought, I got to the corner and she's not there, and I died. So I thought, well, maybe she went ahead to the rink to go skating. So I went to the skating rink and looked around, and I saw her skating out there, and I got a pair of skates and put them on. Went out there skating around real humble and just kind of skated around, and she just kind of with her nose up in the air. And I finally broke the ice, and we got to skate together. And she had a bicycle she rode around Fort Worth. And I rode her home on that bicycle. And she got her record player out and played some of Bing Crosby's music and all that good music. And after a while, I'm thinking, I got to catch that travel bureau car to get back to camp, or I'd be AWOL. And I'd say, well, I better get out of here. She said, well, you don't have to go yet, do you? And there I am, and after a while, I'd say, I got to leave. I got to catch the travel. Well, you don't have to go yet, do you? So I finally did leave and got the travel bureau car back to camp. And later, after we were married, we talked about that. And she says, I was trying to get rid of you. I thought any minute my mother was going to come out and send you packing. I said, well, you Southerners sure have a funny way of explaining you want to get rid of somebody. You kept saying, you don't have to leave yet.
So you ended up marrying her after the war?
After the war.
Did y'all keep in touch while you were in combat?
Yeah, I would write to her, and she would write me letters, and I would read the lines and in between the lines and try to find something in there that was more than what I could see. But later on, she told me, well, you know, you were a soldier, you were going overseas, and you might get killed, and I didn't want to commit myself, you know, and of course I understand that.
Did you see her again before y'all left Camp Barkley? Did you go to Fort Worth and see her more?
Yeah, I think I had, but even then I only had about 3 dates with her before we had to leave. And the day I left her in Fort Worth, you know, I would look back and I saw some fella walk up to her and begin talking with her, my heart sank. And I told her that after we got married. She said, oh, that was Mickey. I didn't care anything about him at all.
What do you remember about shipping out and heading towards New York?
Well, when we got in New York, we were in Camp Shanks, and that evening they let us, if we wanted to, go to New York City. And I guess I took the tunnel or whatever they call it, subway, first one I'd ever ridden on. and went to the stage door canteen and heard the Andrews sisters sing. Well, that was a real treat. And then got back to camp and got on the ship, and I thought, I've already heard about getting seasick. I think it's just all in your head. So I'm psyched up. I'm not going to mess with it. So my outfit was working down where the meals were served in long tables. And the ship started out of the harbor, and I had the salt and pepper and things in the middle on either end. And the salt and pepper and sugar started scooting down the table this way. And my stomach just did a flip-flop. I said, I didn't get to see the Statue of Liberty. I was sick 5 days out, then I got all right. But I saw men in what they call the latrine or whatever that were so sick they were stretched out on that steel deck on the floor just like they were dead. They were so sick. But the way I felt as far as seasickness, just like if you've ever eaten too much, you know you've eaten too much. And that feeling that you're getting your stomach, that's the way it felt to me.
And when you guys got to England, what happened?
We arrived at Bristol, England, went through Wales and down the southern part of England, close to a little town called Lugershaw. And then Andover and Salisbury were close towns. And the first sergeant said, okay, this evening you can go to town. My buddy Kolaski and I went to town on a double-deck bus and went to a center where they had entertainment. And that night when we were ready to leave, we went outside and it was blackout. That was our first experience with blackout. I mean blackout. I said, Kolaski, we'll never find our way to that bus station. We'll have to stay here. So we stayed there all night, I think, for 50 cents or $1. And the next morning we went down to the bus station, and the lady says, where do you want to go? I said, Kolaski, where'd we come from? He says, I don't know. And I looked at her and I said, we paid this much money to get here and we came from that direction. Put us on the bus and got right out where we were supposed to get out. Back at camp. Well, of course, we went sneaking in camp. They caught him. They didn't catch me. He had to pull KP for a while, I guess, over that. And I took a side trip. The Red Cross had trips in England, and I went to Bath, England, where they had all the Roman aqueduct system and all of that, and that was interesting. And then went to London a couple of times. Got to see Westminster Abbey and places of interest like that. And met a nice girl in England. We were sitting out in the park on a park bench, and pretty soon sirens started blowing, and I looked at her, I says, what's that? And she said, air raid. We didn't even move. But went to a little cafe and had fish and chips, and so after a while I told her, I said, now, I'm just about out of money here, so if you want to leave, you can leave. She said, no, I'll stay with you. And going back to the train station, I'm just going to be a long walk. I'm walking along, I see a threepence on the sidewalk, which would be about a nickel in our money. I used that to get the ride back to the train station.
What was your experience with the trip over to France?
Well, they put us on LSTs, and an LST was quite a large vessel that the front end would come down, and then the tanks and trucks and all the equipment would roll out. Well, that LST, we had one meal in the daylight. At breakfast, it was pitch dark. We had to go through the chow line out onto the deck, just black as coal. You had to just eat what you had and hope you hit your mouth. And then at the evening meal, same thing again. Well, one day, one fella went out on the deck, fell off in the North Atlantic. There was supposed to be a chain over an opening there, and it wasn't up there. And he just went off in the North Atlantic. And somebody yelled, "Man overboard," and they stopped and picked him up and put some whiskey in him and got all right.
Was he a little cold?
But the seasick thing, on the LST, that thing on the North Atlantic did everything but turn on end. But they'd give me some other kind of medicine that really worked. I didn't have a bit of trouble. Whatever that was.
What was your first combat experience?
Well, we landed at Le Havre, France, and that was a big city that was totally destroyed. It was just total destruction. And went through France until we came to the area geographically known as Alsace-Lorraine. And I think in that particular area, Germans and French both lived in there. It was kind of a in between two countries. And so the first night of combat, I remember hearing these loud explosions and guns, and so, you know, that sounded pretty dangerous. So I see it. When I hear one of these huge explosions, I thought, well, there's a tree over there. I'll get behind that tree. So I'm running over there, but I'm running cool. So I don't look like I'm really scared, you know, just like Bill Cosby. I'm running cool. And one of the other boys said that same night, Lieutenant Scott was with 3 or 4 fellows, and he heard that, and he says, "Men, hit the dirt." There wasn't no dirt, there was a big mud puddle there, and they all landed right in the middle of it. But we had quite a bit of battle in that particular area. And we came to a town on the Rhine River called Ludwigshafen. And my buddy and I were up in I think it was a granary with a big tall building with a cupola. And we had binoculars and we're looking across the Rhine River and we see the Germans over there. And we made a deal with them that for 3 days we didn't want no more fighting. If they wouldn't shoot at us, we wouldn't shoot at them. So, okay, they agreed, and we could see them cross the river, and they're washing their clothes in the Rhine River, and they're just, tidying up. But it worked that way.
Did you have, what was your experience at Herrlisheim?
Herrlisheim? Some of us slept in a building that night, and it had a big bay window in the front. And when the German guns opened up on us, I could just see one of those shells coming right through that big window. It looked like big as a football field. And some of the boys says, "We're going to the basement." I says, "I'm not going to any basement. I'm going to my foxhole if that building gets hit." So when it kind of quieted down with not so much fire, and I ran outside and up the way there about 50 yards where my foxhole was, and the shooting started up again, and I just went forward like that, and that foxhole just fit. And I'm just laying there going like this.
What else did you experience there?
Well, another thing to this day I don't understand, maybe it was in that same area that we were in this open field, and here was all this equipment, just like infantry boys would have their backpacks, their musette bags, everything, sleeping bags, just like there'd been a whole group out there, and they just took everything off and dropped it, and they were gone. And I never did hear, what happened there.
Do you know about where that was around Herrlisheim?
Well, it may have been Herrlisheim, but we got quite a bit of fire in that one place, and one of our boys got killed there. And I remember at one point when I was going to jump behind a half-track, somebody was already there when I jumped. He was quicker than I was. But then there were two of us in the tent in that place. And the next morning when we started getting fired on again, he got up and he says, "I'm going to the cave." There was a cave nearby where it went down underground. And I thought, well, it don't sound like it's that close yet. I think I'll wait a little longer. And a little bit while I heard this explosion, I flopped back down in my tent. When I raised back up, my combat boots, stones and dirt and stuff was filling them up, and I thought, that's close enough. I'm going to the cave. And I looked at my tent, and it just riddled where shrapnel went through it. And I thought, I don't know where I could have been and not gotten hit. And with that same explosion, this boy, a piece of shrapnel flew, and he had his gun over his shoulder, and the barrel of it was just in line with the back of his head. And a piece of shrapnel hit the end of that barrel and just kind of curled it like that, and didn't put a scratch on him. And later I said, well, this boy was from the same county that I live in Ohio, Delaware County. I said, that shell had 2 Delaware County boys' number and missed us both.
Who were some of your buddies at this time?
One of the close ones was a boy named Drescher. And actually he was killed over there too. But he was an instrument man. Knew how to use an aiming circle and that sort of thing. So one night they needed somebody to go up front and to help out, and asked me if I would go, and I said, yeah, I'll go. And they asked me if I could use an aiming circle. I said, no. Instruments, I knew the radio, but I didn't know that kind of equipment. Well, then they got a hold of Drescher, and he was into that. And he went up, and he got killed up front there. And I often wondered, if he took my place in, a roundabout way.
Any other friends you made? Any other close friends?
Yeah. Well, in Camp Barkley at one time, we had to go on what they call a Marine obstacle course. And it was a lot tougher than anything we'd been used to. At one point, you had to run 100 yards with somebody on your back. At the 100 yards, he would get down, you'd get on his back, and he would run back. And then after that, you'd go through the barbed wire situation. And then at the end, you had a race course where you run around the race course. And I thought, well, I was a pretty fast runner. And I figured Drescher's about the fastest one, so I'll just lay behind him until towards the end of it, and then I'll try to go on by. When we got close to the end of the race, I was about 12 feet behind him, and I thought, well, I better, turn it up a little. There wasn't no more turn up left. So I thought, well, second place isn't all that bad. And about that time I saw a shadow. Here come 2 big long legs around me of Lieutenant Bergner. And he went around me, but Drescher was already across the finish line, so I guess I had to settle for third.
After you guys moved out of Herlisheim, where did your group go to?
We pretty much headed south, down in Austria area, down around the Black Forest, and I thought what a terrible thing it was to see those beautiful trees cut down just to put across the road for roadblocks, just just ruined. I thought, what a waste, you know. But down in that area, we stayed in several castles at one time. That was quite an experience. About all the rooms would have deer heads on the walls, you know, and things of that nature. And the officers got the battery pianist to come down to their area to play for them, you know. And Bill Elliott, he would hunch over that piano and he would just work it over, you know, playing boogie woogie and all that music. He was a pretty popular boy.
Did you have any experience with the concentration camps?
At the end of the war, they were taking groups of the men to go to see it, you know. And the particular vehicle that I was in, just when we got there, they shut it off. They wouldn't let anybody else go through there. So we just saw what we saw from the outside.
Do you ever encounter any SS troops?
Well, there was one town where we were out from it a little ways, and over the radio they mentioned that there were SS troops in there. And so we'd heard stories that they were afraid of black soldiers. I don't know, you know, the reason or anything. So they said, well, we're going to send some black soldiers in there to clean them out. But I guess another thing that impressed me was the Air Force, how efficient the Air Force was. The P-47 Thunderbird aircraft would come in to strafe, and you could just count them off as they peeled off. And then, of course, the air would be full of tracers, you know, you could see them just shooting. And when they'd come out on the other side, you'd count them off again, there wouldn't be one of them missing. I said, that is one good airplane. And then B-17 Flying Fortress would have a large group of them after they'd come from a bombing run. And I remember one day, one of them was kind of lagging behind, just kind of limping along, and pretty soon we saw the people bail out. And we was all hollering, you know, we said, you're not on the right side yet, you're still on the German side. So I don't know how it turned out for those people. But two of their German fighter planes came through our gun position one day, just about, I'd say no more than 20 feet off of the ground. And everybody cut loose on them. The first one made it through all right. The second one, we hit it. And when it's going along level like this, all of a sudden it just like a frog, you know, trying to leap. I assume he's trying to get altitude so he could bail out, and he didn't make it. And we ran up there where his plane crashed, and he would just turn part way around in the cockpit, and the parachute was out in little squares where fire had gotten to it, and they just pieced the silk, laying around. He didn't make it.
You said they sent the black troops in you said they sent the black troops in to fight the SS?
Yeah.
Was that in a town?
Yeah.
What happened?
I don't know. We never heard.
That's interesting. Any other combat stories that you want to tell?
Well, my friend and I were disconnected from B Battery at one point, and so we were staying with some French soldiers. That's the only way we had anything to eat. And I thought, they got fruit cocktail and stuff like that they got from the United States. We didn't even have that. And they had been through a lot of different experiences. One of them, they said, swam the Rhine River in the middle of winter to escape. And so they had French bread. He picked up a loaf of that French bread, and he held it up to his chest and pulled out a blade and cut off a slice and handed it to you, and give you a piece of cheese. And then they went in the area someplace to a winery and had a 5-gallon can and filled that with wine and brought it back and poured some of that wine out in the tea kettle. Set it on the table and then pour it out of the tea kettle in your glass. And my friend and I weren't used to drinking at all, and so this is going to be our first experience, and I'll get this big, hilarious feeling. So when we left to go back where we were staying, I was staggering around, and I thought, I don't understand this. I must be drunk if I can't walk straight, but I still know everything I'm doing. So we got back where we were staying. We sat and watched each other to see when this big feeling would hit us. Never did hit. We just both got sick. And I said, Dale, anything makes me sick, I'm done with it. That was it. And somebody said, well, what was it? I said, well, they said it was vermouth. And they said, no wonder. But some of the little German kids would follow you around with little tin cans and things and some of them would collect cigarette butts for their parents, whatever they get, coffee or anything like that. And this one little fella, about 3 years old, where we had to go eat, we had to go down a deep ravine and up the other side, and it was too much for him, so he'd wait on the other side for me. And that one day when I brought back a big slice of bread with butter and strawberry jam on it, I took him in the place where we were staying because I knew the bigger kids would take it away from him. And kid had such a look on his face like you'd give a kid a new electric train or something. And then the evenings when his mother would call for him, she couldn't hardly get him away from me. I always wished I'd kind of found out who he was and kept in touch with him. And one little old lady, all she ever had to eat was potatoes. And I thought, I bet she'd get sick of potatoes. So I brought some stuff from the chow truck one day for her, and she gave me a bottle of grape wine. And that was good. It didn't make me sick, it was good.
What were the German civilians like? What were the German civilians like?
The civilians were nice people, actually. That's what I felt personally. I felt like with the French people, I could get along without them. But the German people were all right. In France, if a place was torn up, had been shelled, they didn't want to clean it up. They said, we'll just leave it for a memorial. Over there in Germany, a place got shot up the next day. The women would be out there sweeping and raking and cleaning up already. They didn't want to just leave everything messed up. But I told somebody, we were in England, I said, I could understand the Germans better than I could the English with that choppy English accent. And but I said, I could live in France for 100 years and not learn that language.
What do you remember about the last day of the war?
Well, we pretty well knew it was practically over, and they were going to split up the outfit, and they began to send them away a couple at a time, you know. And they reprocessed a bunch of us. Where I'd been in the artillery, they had assigned me to an infantry outfit. Was going to send me back to States and then to Japan to fight over there. And halfway across the Atlantic, the war with France, or with Japan was over with. One of the boys got down in his duffel bag and had an old German air siren. He got out on the deck, began to crank that thing up. I said, you could hear that clear across the Atlantic Ocean, I think. And we come back into Boston Harbor on August 19th on my birthday. And I got a 45-day furlough, and they sent me down to Camp Swift, Texas. And from there, over to Monroe, Louisiana, guarding German prisoners. And I thought, I didn't know we had any German prisoners in this country. And I heard later on they had them in a lot of places. But each one of us would take a bunch of them out. First thing in the morning, they'd pick cotton for the farmers. And the farmers, I think, paid their government so much for the use of them. They're supposed to pick 200 pounds a day. And my wife, being from Texas, I said, well, how was that? Was that very much cotton? She says, well, a good picker could pick 400 pounds a day.
And how soon were you discharged, and what did you do after that? How soon were you discharged, and what happened?
After I left Louisiana, they sent me to Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, and that's where I got my discharge. And in the process, one fella motioned me to come over to his table, and I went over there. And he said, now you could join the reserves, what's called the inactive reserves, and you wouldn't have to train or anything. If anything happened again, you wouldn't have to go any sooner than any place else, anybody else, and you still get your longevity and get in the same kind of an outfit. So I thought, well, it sounds like you got everything to gain, nothing to lose. So I signed up. In 1950, I got, 48. I got discharged in 45. In 48, I got a notice from them and I had to have to come down and re-up, which I intended to do. Slipped my mind. They sent my discharge. In 1950, the Korean War started up. And after that, I was over in Pennsylvania to visit one of my buddies. I knocked on the door, and his wife came to the door. I says, "Where's Phil?" She says, "He's over in Korea." I said, "Well, did he get in the same kind of an outfit, the artillery?" "Well, not exactly. It was airborne artillery."
And so because you didn't go re-up, you didn't go to Korea.
That's right.
How did you feel about that by then? Were you glad, or?
Yeah, I was happy. I already had a boy, and one day when I came home from work, when he was about 3 years old, 3 or 4, I came home and there was Larry marching through the house with a Confederate flag saying, "The South will rise again." And I says, "Bernadine, you've got her brainwashed already."
So who did you work for after you got out of the service?
The Nestle Fruit Company.
Did you stay with them?
I worked for them 43 years. And bought 2 properties while I was working for them, so I got along all right.
All right.
And when my wife was 60, she said she wanted to go to college. She went to school in Mahia, Texas. Never got to go to college, and she always wanted to go. So I said, "Whatever makes you happy." And our boy said, "Well, you've been out of school 40 years, you'll never make it." She graduated with a 4-point average, summa cum laude.
Where'd she go to school at?
Otterbein in Westerville, Ohio. I took a couple of courses just to audit the course while she was going to English literature and astronomy. I always liked astronomy.
Well, was there anything else you wanted to add?